Hi, I am the father of a 10-year-old boy with pathological demand avoidance syndrome, or PDA. My aim in this video is to provide an introduction to PDA and to give you an overview of this little known syndrome. PDA is a low incidence special need which has received little popular attention since it was first described approximately 30 years ago. But despite early controversy, it is now earning a growing professional recognition, and there is a steady increase in material available to support and guide those with an interest in PDA. Throughout this video there will be details of some of the online resources shown at the bottom of this screen. Now I have to say that I'm not a health professional, and so my information must be considered as a layman's perspective. My experience is largely limited to my son's situation. Now of course no two children are the same, and so my take on PDA will not necessarily be identical to the experience of others. Having said this, most of the information that I provide is based directly on the research and conclusions made by Professor Elizabeth Newson, who was the first person to suggest that there was a group of people for whom a new syndrome should be described. PDA is what is known as a pervasive developmental disorder. It is pervasive because it permeates through everything and affects most aspects of character, behaviour and understanding. There is little of the person that is left unaffected in some way by the syndrome. It's described as a developmental disorder since the skills that are lacking or impaired by the syndrome are those that one would usually acquire naturally as we develop. For example, reading body language would be one of the many life skills that we take for granted but are not something that we are taught to do. Someone with a developmental disorder has not received all these free gifts in full measure and does not have all that you and I would consider as our birthright. But what is pathological demand avoidance, and what are we to understand by this label? The word pathological sounds frightening, but it is used here for its psychiatric meaning and simply to relate to a behaviour that is habitual, maladaptive and compulsive. You could think of it as meaning something like extraordinarily obsessive or unusually determined. Avoidance needs no explanation, but I think it would be useful to take a look at what we mean by demands. The first thought that comes into my head is a forceful order or command, but the demands that we need to understand are far wider ranging than just these obvious explicit ones. A demand may also be an instruction, a request, or an unspoken expectation, and could relate to doing or not doing something. A demand may be placed by others, or it may be self-inflicted by an anticipated or imagined demand yet to come. Sometimes just a situation, location or environment may be enough to impose a demand. Also, a demand need not be a negative experience, but could equally be something that is desirable. Now some valid questions are likely to be raised. Don't all children avoid demands? Many parents might say, I can't get my child to go to bed when they're told, or eat their vegetables, so does this mean that they have PDA? Another comment might be that not wanting to do as we are told is normal, and that if our child were totally compliant and never argued against anything, we would have legitimate worries that they had no spirit or drive for independence. Surely some resistance is a healthy sign of a maturing child. This is true, but what I am referring to is avoidance in the extreme and an inability to comply with even the basic everyday demands of life. For the less sympathetic, another thought will arise. Surely these children are cut too much slack. They lack good discipline and are products of over-indulgent parenting, sounding rather like spoilt brats. But I can assure you that this is not the case. As parents, we're used to having these accusations brought against us. They're largely untrue and certainly not helpful. Many of us have successfully raised other siblings without excessive problems. Our other children may have been difficult at times, but tried and tested formulae did work. Fair but firm consistency coupled with incentives and sanctions win through in the end. However, with our PDA kids, the story has been very different. The child with PDA will go to extraordinary lengths to resist even the smallest demand, often expending far more effort avoiding something than it would have taken them to comply with it in the first place. Parents will talk of children with limitless energy for resistance, who will hold out for hours over a 5-second requirement. Letting them know who's boss usually does not work. If you were determined to use your size and strength to establish your authority, you would be likely to meet extreme resistance. A hollow victory would only be gained by using more force than is ever acceptable. Boot camp discipline is just not effective. Unfortunately, neither are more restrained, old-fashioned and traditional measures. I can assure you that no matter how determined you are to stand your ground, the person with PDA will be even more determined. Not all avoidance involves direct confrontation, and a wide range of imaginative strategies can be employed. These children are master manipulators and have a need to be in control. They will utilise a varied assortment of ways to maintain control and avoid the anxiety that they experience when facing demands. Anxiety underpins much of the difficult behaviour, and if you view this behaviour as a panic reaction, you are better placed to understand their motivation to avoid anxiety-provoking demands. Whilst avoiding demands is the most dominant defining characteristic of PDA, this alone would not describe the full child. It is important to clarify that PDA is not just a childhood condition, and neither is it something you catch or grow out of, and it certainly isn't just a difficult phase that you pass through. It is a lifelong difficulty that will be carried to the grave. It is much a part of the person as the colour of their eyes or the size of their feet. They're stuck with it. Certain issues will wax and wane in severity, and as they mature they do learn to manage some problems successfully. However, PDA will remain with them for life, often as a disability largely hidden to the outside world. PDA is related to but distinctly different from what is referred to as the autistic spectrum. The most common autistic spectrum disorders, or ASDs, are autism and Asperger's syndrome. There are aspects of PDA that remind others of Asperger's or autism, but they never tick all the right boxes. They either do not fulfill all the criteria or have features that would be unusual in autism or Asperger's. Failure to find a label that sits comfortably can lead to a best fit diagnosis of atypical or non-typical autism or Asperger's. Alternatively, a PDA child may have been diagnosed as having a pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, or PDD-nos, which really is just a catch-all term for those who do not fit into the obvious autistic spectrum categories. Ideally, a diagnosis of PDA should only be given after a detailed review of a child's developmental history and a thorough examination through play-based assessment. The exact behaviours seen will vary from person to person and will be influenced by the individual's personality and character. Commonly, there are also other difficulties, such as learning difficulties or ADHD, that confuse the picture further. For these reasons, it is important that a diagnosis is sought from an experienced professional. I hope that this has been a useful introduction to PDA. In the next video, I'd like to take a look at the broader range of PDA characteristics and behaviours. Thank you for watching.